So good evening and welcome everyone to Harmony Club's 2020 Post-Election Forum with Doug Schoen, Henry Scheinkoff, and Ed Rollins. I'm Chris McAllister, the Clubhouse Manager here at Harmony, and I am so pleased to see as many members we have registered and logged in for tonight's discussion. During these unprecedented times, we have tried to reimagine what a club can be through virtual programs that promote camaraderie, critical discourse, and fellowship. And I hope that tonight's 2020 post-election forum will provide just that and insight into a truly unique election cycle. I'd like to remind everyone who's logged in that tonight's webinar is being recorded and it will be added to the club's virtual resources on our website and mobile app. All participants are encouraged to ask questions through the Q&A option in their Zoom toolbar. We hope to get to as many questions as possible at the conclusion of the program. I would also like to acknowledge and welcome all of the current and former club officers who are logged in for tonight's program, including current President Bradley Harris and our most recent former President Robert Werble. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Harmony member Douglas Schoen. Dr. Schoen has been an extremely influential campaign consultant for over 30 years. He has been one of the most innovative people in democratic politics, working behind the scenes as a political strategist for some of the world's most influential and respected politicians. Dr. Schoen has authored multiple books like America in the Age of Trump, The Nixon Effect, Hopelessly Divided, and The Power of the Vote, and that's just to name a very short few. Dr. Schoen holds degrees from Harvard Law School and a PhD from Oxford University. I'm excited, Dr. Schoen, that you're here tonight. Thank you so much. It's our pleasure to have you. I'm excited to hear what you have to say, as well as all of our great panelists that Dr. Schoen will now introduce. So take it away.
Great. Well, first of all, Chris, thank you for that kind introduction. And I would say thank you to the members who've logged in. A special thanks to my friend Brad Harris and to Davina Weinstein for organizing this. These are unprecedented times, and I would be negligent if I did not thank everyone, including you, for the extraordinary efforts to keep the club going. And as a member of the club, I read Brad Harris's letter today with great pride and admiration for everything that's been done to reimagine a club in this era. Without further ado, let me introduce two dear friends of mine. Hank Scheinkoff has been a friend of mine for over 40 years. And yes, Hank, it has been that long. Hank has worked on over 700 campaigns from New York City to the Dominican Republic to Israel and around the world. He worked with me on the successful Clinton re-election campaign in 1996. He also, I think it's important to add, in addition to having a PhD in political science, is an ordained rabbi, a brilliant guy, a mimic, a comic, and one of the most creative political strategists I've had the great pleasure of working with. He and his wife, Debbie, have been dear friends of mine, as well as Isaac and Sarah, their children, all active members of Harmony and all very, very dear and friends of us all. Ed Rollins has been a friend of mine for almost those 40 years. He's certainly been a mentor of mine, a colleague of mine at Fox News. He was Ronald Reagan's campaign manager in '83 and '84. He ran the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. I told Ed that I would give him a unique introduction tonight, and I will try to do that. He is the only political consultant I know who has been both an active boxer for 10 years and a boxing coach. And I remember once asking him about that, and he said, "You have not been hit until you've had Joe Frazier's left hook hit you in the abdomen." He said it was on that time he came to understand that he would best choose a non-contact sport, which is arguably, perhaps in its own way, as dangerous as boxing, but a little bit less direct, which is politics. But Ed has been successful at the highest level of politics and government. He has been successful as a commentator and as a strategist, and has been a great source of conversation, analysis, and insight for me. Hank, with your approval, I will begin with our true guest, Hank and I being proud members of Harmony, Ed being a welcome and frequent guest at Harmony. Ed, let me begin with you and ask you, what's your impression of the election? What happened? What was the electorate saying? And how, as the head of a PAC that raised 50 to 60 million dollars, I think it was the Great American PAC, and worked on behalf of President Donald Trump, how do you assess this election? Will there be a recount? Will the results change? What do you see happening going forward?
Well, first of all, it was a most unusual election, and obviously you played a part in with former Mayor Bloomberg being somewhat involved. I think the three of us have been very dear friends for a long time, and that's what politics should be about. And the difference between boxing and politics is you can. One good thing about boxing, it taught me how to take a good beating, and you learn how to take a good beating in boxing. You can take a good beating in politics because you do. It's a hard game. It's a tough game. And I think at the end of the day, the country gets what it deserves, which is governing. This was a polarized electorate from the beginning. Donald Trump is a very unique figure. I can't explain to you what he is or what he's going to do. I can only sit back and comment as to him as a phenomenon. And I think the reality is most people didn't think he had any kind of a chance of being a viable candidate this time. I had serious doubts. And I think the reality, if this was election 6 months ago and the virus hadn't come forth, he might have been reelected. As it was, the virus became the overarching issue. He didn't quite play it well. If he would have come out of the hospital after basically having had his own case of virus and said, I understand your pain and your empathy, and had real empathy, he might have done better. But instead, he played Superman, which is the sort of the role that Donald Trump likes to play, and I think he lost some sympathy. You look at the post polls, which are now starting to all come out, and many more to come. Democrats put back their coalition. When Trump won 4 years ago, he drew to the inside flush or straight, which is the Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. For a variety of reasons, he won those last two. Lack of focus by maybe the first lady, former first lady. This time, Democrats were fully back engaged, and I think the reality is there's their states. They won them back easily. We expanded, and they expanded somewhat. I got a beautiful lady there with a mask on. I couldn't quite figure out what's going on here. But at the end of the day here, I think Trump went out and won this thing himself. He had lots of chaos in his campaign. They spent an enormous amount of money early. They ran out of money in the later stages of the campaign, and I think to a certain extent that had some impact on them. But I can't explain what he's going to be or what he's going to do. He's not going away peacefully, obviously. He's certainly talking about running again 4 years from now, which sort of freezes the Republican Party. It's now his party. He can own it as long as he wants and create chaos for anybody else that wants to step in. But it wasn't about issues as much as it was. I think to a certain extent, some of the things the Democrats get caught up in. Black Lives Matter is not a cutting issue, but it's a more supported issue. Defund the police is not a cutting issue, and certainly that had an impact. Destruction of the cities certainly had an impact. And I think the premise that the Democrats were going to be sold out their portfolio to AOC and the Green Deals and all the rest of it, I think scared some voters away and scared them back in the Republican camp. So.
And what kind of, I'm going to ask you, and we'll turn to Hank in a second, but a quick question. Are you optimistic about a Biden presidency, or do you see challenges?
I think there's always challenges. I'm someone who always wishes the president well, whoever that president may be. I've worked for 3 presidents. I've been in 2 White Houses. They're tough jobs and they're big jobs. Right now, we need Biden to succeed, and so for the short term, long term, whatever the case may be, I'll be supportive. I think the challenge is enormous. A combination of the virus, getting the virus under control, which is now more out of control than ever, and the economy, getting the economy back. And when people don't realize, we spent $6 trillion last year and took in about 3. So you tack that on to a $30+ trillion deficit, and you have big holes in cities and states. And even though the president said it's all Democrats, the reality is they all came up with shortfalls because of the lack of revenue. New York City being a perfect example. It had nothing to do with Cuomo or the mayor. It had to do with the lack of revenue. So my sense is the challenges are severe. The one good thing, the president-elect knows the game. He doesn't walk in as a stranger to the Oval Office. He'll put an all-star team together and more experienced than some of the people that obviously served in our administration. But the challenge is very, very severe.
Hank, if I can turn to you, I remember your kindness in sharing your PhD thesis with me, which focused on the movement of the Catholic vote, working class Catholics away from the Democratic Party. And your argument was that this was a long-term secular trend that was part of a larger change in the Democratic Party. You argued, and I think you were right, to the detriment of the Democrats. How do you see what happened in this election in the context of both your professional work and your academic work? What do you see for the Biden administration, and what do you see long-term for the Democratic Party?
I'm optimistic about America, first of all. The democratic system with small d works because why? Because a record number of people turned out, stood on lines, did the things that you and I, Douglas, have seen in other parts of the world where people wait on line for days sometimes to vote because they can. It was most extraordinary to watch that occur here in the United States of America. So I'm hopeful about the American system. What I'm not hopeful about right now are the trend lines and population shifts and whether the society can ultimately adjust to the changes that are coming. The cities have become whiter, younger, and the income gap between those who live and those who are moving in are much more significant than ever before, number one. Number two, the de-Europeanization of America is a serious, serious issue and is causing, I think, a lot of the consternation among white, blue-collar, working-class people. When you throw that together with the complete destruction of social networks, there were creations of the plants, the places in which they work, the parishes that are no longer are starting to fold up. The decline of religion has a lot to do with what occurred this past time. We now know, according to the Pew researchers, that the Pew investigators, that the largest denomination in the United States is ex-Catholics. So the very things that were American are somehow transforming into what we don't know. We don't know what they're going to be yet. The only thing that remains static is voting. That seems to be in great increase in intensity. The other thing that's going on that's worth noting is what the Democratic Party is. Now, I'm a blue collar, white, ethnic, urban person to whom and a guy came out of trade unions. I came out of the Teamsters Union, ultimately, as you know, Doug. So my perspective is entirely different. What I see is I see the re-Reaganization of what's left of the blue collar white Democrat population within the Democrat Party. And what do I mean by that? Is that the values that the majority of the party shares are not the values that are shared by the minority. How so? It's not blue collar. These are people who are of a different what one social scientist has called the creative class. They don't share the same values. They're much further to the left. They're much more interested in what's a good way to say it? In breaking down the structure than they are in bringing people together. They think in smaller groups. It's not good news. It's not good news for the Democrats. And I would argue that the Republicans should have a very, very good year in 2022. I also think that Joe Biden will do just fine. He's the right guy. You know, we're all students of our own history and the things we've experienced in our own lives. Both of you have done most amazing things. I would argue that Harry Truman was a very normal person. And I think his biographers, particularly McCullough, have made that pretty clear. An average, decent guy who came from a corrupt political machine, but didn't look at it that way and just kept going. Joe Biden is an average, normal person, and he's very much the kind of figure we need right now. Donald Trump is a response to the things I talked about a few moments ago. Joe Biden is normal, but Donald Trump's not going away anytime soon. And what he represents will be with us so long as these adjustments keep going on.
And what practical advice would you give the Biden administration going forward? They've appointed a chief of staff yesterday, Ron Klain, who you know and I know.
Yep.
And the question I ask is, if he said to you, what do I do first? What's most important? How do I govern? What would you say?
I would say bring the military very close, find symbols that are very American, that are incontrovertible, the voting booth, the military, let's see, public service, volunteerism, take the issues away from the opposition before they get started, so that in fact they're isolated. And if I were saying to you, if you said to me, Hank, what's the first legislative thing I ought to be doing to bring the unions, the blue collar Catholics in and keep everybody in place and try to do business with the Republicans? It's the very thing Donald Trump should have done the day he came into office, which is an infrastructure program akin to what Franklin Delano Roosevelt did with the WPA. Don't build prisons, build roads, build dams, repair bridges, repair things, put people to work, and we'll worry about the debt later, frankly. But we can't not have people working. That's the first thing I would say. COVID survival is part of that, getting the country working again. That the president was right about. It's just the way he went about it.
Ed Rollins, if I can go back to you, as I look at the country, my perspective is that we are, a book I wrote, and Chris McAllister referenced it, Hopelessly Divided. I wrote that book, I guess, about 6-7 years ago, and we're much further divided now than we were then. What do you see, and I'm going to ask Hank as well in a second to speak to this, what do you see are the implications of that polarization, both at home and abroad? What do we do? How does Biden heal it? And how does he deal with the left wing of the Democratic Party that really doesn't want to compromise with the Republicans?
Well, you're exactly right on the division in the country. And I go back to the point that Hank made earlier. The enormous number of people who turned out, normally 20 million more people get added to the roll each presidential cycle. By the time we finish this one, we could have 150, 160 million people voted this time under very trying circumstances. And I think the early voting is here to stay. We're not going back. And Republicans made a very significant mistake in not adhering to that, understanding that, and certainly they're probably behind the cycle. Republicans have become a white party. I mean, a white fat party. I mean, I sort of represent the party. I came out of a blue collar background. I wanted to make it a working people's party, and I did that with Reagan. It's now become even less than a working people's party. It's become a wanting to work people's party. It's a lot of disaffected workers out there who thought they were going to live the American dream and did everything right, raised their kids, worked hard early on, and they have lots of insecurities today as to their future. And I think that became somewhat the backbone. The Rockefeller Party is gone. The dynamics today, unless we make some inroads with Hispanic voters, which we made a little bit this time, and unless we cut the gap among women voters and appeal to them somewhat, it's a short-term strategy. I mean, we lost this election. I agree with Hank. We have a tremendous chance of winning the House back in the next cycle. We did very well in the House this time, considering most people didn't expect that. But long-term, I think we're going to be in this divided government for the foreseeable future. We're divided demographically, we're divided geographically, and I think to a certain extent, the animosity, the unwillingness to sit down and deal on things that are really important have really come into play. And my hope is that Biden, with his past relationship and as a guy who was a deal maker, can sit down with McConnell and some of the Republicans and come up with, it needs to be an HR1. I totally agree with Hank. The infrastructure is key. It's the only way we're going to get people back to work in the inner cities. It's too long a pattern to get the factories reopened and what have you. But there are things that he can do and will do, I'm sure. The key thing I hope is that he holds up. The presidency is a tough job, and I don't buy all the stuff that they said about him. Although I have to tell you, as a practitioner of our politics, this was the ugliest campaign I've ever seen in my life. I worked for a man, Ronald Reagan, who never mentioned his opponent, never said a harsh word about any opponent in all the years he was there. The kinds of names that they called Biden, the things they said about Biden, I thought were very detrimental. And that's the Trump style, and to a certain extent, the whole lock them up. There's not the respect, and if you don't respect your opponents and underestimate your opponents, you're going to fail long term.
Hank, how do you assess the polarization we faced? I mean, I think Ed spoke to the challenges we face as a society, but given your perspective and your view on the world, I'd love to get your assessment of polarization.
Democracy, Doug, as you know, and as certainly as Ed knows, and we know as practitioners, and I think in words, right? And I see word pictures, and then I let somebody else shoot the words. That's great. But the point is, look, politics is really about symbols. The failure to protect those symbols has given us what we have today. The failure to protect the idea of work. Okay, work has changed. How we define work has changed. That has created a lot of the polarization against the coasts, which are much more technologically driven than the heartland, which is much more, hard work hand driven. Okay, that sense of absolute attenuation between those two ways of thinking about the world is not going away anytime soon. Um, Income inequality is real, whether you're a Republican or Democrat. The statistics are very clear, and we have to come up with a better way to deal with this. That is driving a lot of the anger, a lot of the frustration, and a lot of the fear. And it's being perceived in different ways by different groups and acted on. By the younger people, they're in the streets, okay? By the older people, it's the younger people are getting what we're not getting, and we don't have the education that the people on the coasts have, and Washington can drop dead. That's Donald Trump's, basic way of coming into being. So what is the solution to it? I think that the smart thing to do would be for Biden and for McConnell to sit down and come up with immediate changes to the tax code, figure out, because they both enjoy screwing Chuck Schumer, because that's what that really is about. If they get rid of the carried interest, for example, and cave that as a working class argument, McConnell would win, the Republicans would win, what's left of Reaganism would win, and the Democrats would win publicly among the class they need to get. Then it would be a fairer fight. But the way this thing is stacked up now, it's really stacked in the direction of the Republicans. And that has a lot to do, again, with what's left of the European people who can trace their descent to Europe. They're angry, they're concerned, and the very America they see and that they fought for in many cases and their parents died for is falling apart. One last thing. We discount frequently what foreign affairs does to presidential elections, and the data on direct impact, Schlotzman, Verber, all these people have written about it, is de minimis. But we do know, in Graham Allison's book on Thucydides and Athens and Sparta today, which is the way of looking at the problems America has long-term with China, is not an insignificant book and not something we should elide over. People are unconsciously nervous about the position, and publicly so, the position of the United States in the world system over time. Donald Trump used that to his advantage. In fact, some of what he says is entirely accurate. In fact, some of it was exaggerated. But America is in a very, very serious power play with large parts of the world. That has to be resolved in some fashion because symbolism matters by the president with help from the Senate so that we can get the country moving. If we have a battle lines drawn on, we're giving too much to them and not getting enough for us, this is not going to work out well. That's really a serious issue.
Hank, let me ask you a question from your perspective. Will Mitch McConnell, as you hypothesize, be willing to deal with Joe Biden in a way that he wasn't prepared to deal with Democrats previously, particularly in the Obama administration? Will we get bipartisan cooperation, whether the Democrats or more likely the Republicans control the Senate? I'm curious your view. And will AOC and the left wing of the Democratic Party put up with it?
The Democratic Party has been an extremist for the last, I would guess, probably since 1968, since the disaster of Chicago and everything that came after it, the hard hat riot of 70. All these things going forward have had an extraordinary impact. So what is the Democratic Party? It is a combination of smaller chiefs and smaller tribes that come together every once in a while to pick up jobs and pieces of the pie when they can. And the Republicans have become a much more regionalized, much less stratified, and more reminiscent of the reenactment of the Civil War in many ways, with border states falling into place. McConnell operates in that model. He wants to maintain power. Why should he do business with Joe Biden? Only for one reason, to get strategic advantage so he can say, I did this despite the president, or I did this with the president without mentioning the president. The real issue here is Georgia. If McConnell comes out of Georgia with 1 out of 2, he'll be very happy. If he comes out of it with 2 out of 2, he'll be ecstatic. The question then becomes, if he's not weak, will he do business with Biden? And the answer is likely yes. Why? They come from the most exclusive, more exclusive club than the Harmony Club. I know people find this hard to believe. Much more exclusive. It's called the U.S. Senate. And those relationships go on forever. And even if you've been a senator and gone to jail, you print up cards that say U.S. Senator retired, RET, with the parentheses, and you get all your business taken care of. So those relationships are not insignificant. Also race. He's not black. People think that Obama's problems had nothing to do with the fact that he was black. They're wrong. He was 10 years too early. He said it himself. He's right. You come up with programs that make everybody win elections, everybody's happy. You come up with programs or ideas that force people to bang heads together, no one's happy. And we can't afford that unhappiness right now as a nation. So I think they will find ways to get along in the ways that I just suggested.
Uh, Ed, I would be negligent if I did not ask you the obvious question. What is the future of Donald Trump now that it appears very, very likely that he will not be reelected? Will he want to run again? Will he start a network? Will he be a force to deal with on a day-to-day basis in the Republican Party? How should we think about Donald Trump, and what do you anticipate he will do?
Well, we've never had a phenomenon like Donald Trump in modern times. We've had third parties, and we've had Tea parties, and we've had Wallace and racist parties, and we've had all sorts of things. But this is Trump's party. For whatever reason, Republicans will roll over and play dead for Trump. It's his for the foreseeable future. I think there's controllables and uncontrollables in politics. The controllables are the party, who's going to be the party chairman, how to do resources, those kinds of things. The uncontrollables are what happens to him in the court system. Is New York going to really pursue things against him, tear his taxes apart, go after his properties? He's not going to be happy when he leaves that White House. He's going to lose his perks. Most presidents, by the time they're done, are more than happy to go off to their ranches or go to Florida or go somewhere, write their books and do those kinds of things. This is not a man who reads a book, so he doesn't care about writing books. He loves to be on TV. He loves the attention. He loves the adulation. But the critical thing here is he going to have the resource to do that? He wants to go out and do rallies. Well, who's going to pay for the rallies? The rallies have been paid for by his campaigns at this point in time. But he's a phenomenon. It's like World Federated Wrestling. I mean, he loves that attention, and the villains get to go on, and I'm not saying he's a villain, but he likes that attention. So my sense is he's not going to go off to the wilderness. Now, he's 74 years old now, and he runs again. He's going to be, 4 years from now, he'd be 78. I don't know what kind of condition he's going to be in. I don't know what kind of condition the president's going to be in. The reality here is, but I think his intent at this point in time is he's not going to step out of the limelight. If someone comes to him and offers him a counter plan of how you can compete with Fox, he'll jump on it. I don't think he's going to put it together himself. I think what we found out about Trump is he was a good developer, a good salesman, not necessarily a good businessman. So I think putting all those parts together, he's not Roger Ailes, and there is no Roger Ailes to put a Fox system together. It's kind of oversaturated in cable television these days. So my sense is he will do whatever he can to seek attention. The more attention he gets, the more it diminishes everybody else in the party. The man I feel the sorriest for is Mike Pence. Mike Pence is out in the wilderness more than anybody at this point in time. He's carried the ball as much as he could for the president. There's no future for him. Even if Trump runs again, no guarantees that Pence will be on the ticket. So the reality is all those who are standing in line waiting for Trump to go to the wayside so they could run. Those dreams aren't there anymore. So he's going to be a factor in some way, shape, or form. Going to be a critic in some way, shape, or form. And I think it all depends on his health and on the legal system.
Doug, can I go back to something you
Yes,
asked?
please, Hank.
Yeah, the AOC left-wing Democrat Party question, which is not really, well, it's hard to say. What I said about the Democrat Party being a very different place with multiple fiefdoms and very confused is true. But the AOC, Ilhan Omar, Talib, and now the additions of, let's see, Mandir, I forgot his name, you forgive me. No racial or other connotation intended. A couple of more, the dumping of Lacey Clay in the Missouri seat, tells you something that's going on. Younger, more minority, more genderized. What do they want? Look, they are a social movement, not real political movement, and therein lies the problem. And in all social movements, when something gets accomplished, the social movement dies. That is why they will find more acolytes, that whole group, the squad and others, Presley. That is why they will increase their rhetoric. That is why they will increase their appearances, because it is not in their interest to get anything accomplished. And that's why Donald Trump may, in fact, have a shot 4 years down the road. Why? Because the move is to run against them. There will be more of them, not less. The anger on the left and the anger on the right will only increase. And as that does, it makes more opportunities for people who can combat that kind of thinking. They're not going to get anything done, but they will attack Israel. They will attack democratic institutions under the guise of socialism. They will attack institutions as we know them overall, and that they will get young people excited who, frankly, are concerned about real things like student loans, like income inequality, like the cost of housing. Anybody who can resolve any of those issues on a bipartisan fashion reduces the power of AOC and company. But do we, does the system and do the leaders have the courage and brains to do that is the question. That's different.
Hank, I'll put you on the spot quickly. Does AOC run against Chuck Schumer? And if she does, who's going to prevail?
Well, she's going to
I
lose
don't
the
think she
state.
runs against Schumer. Go ahead.
Right.
Yes, Ed.
She's not, the moment she steps up and tries to run for a bigger office, I think she loses. I think she can sit in her seat for a long time and become somewhat of a leader of the outside groups. The big question Democrats have is is Nancy Pelosi going to continue as speaker? I would assume she is. She promised she'd serve 4 years. She's a very capable person, and obviously she amazes me how much she keeps in her head and keeps moving forward. But she's old school. And you have a large Black caucus today who desperately would like to have a leader and have some very significant players who could be the next speaker. And so my sense today is once that eternal gets out, and what would be smart would be make her speaker emeritus and let her have a senior position, and then pick a new speaker that can lead you in the midterm election and lay some plans for the future. But right today, it's kind of old school. The old liberalism doesn't necessarily work and doesn't sell well.
Ed, let me go back to one of the issues you alluded to and Hank did, and I'll put you on the spot. If Donald Trump runs, and I think it's likely he will run in 4 years, do you think he will get the Republican nomination? Do you think he'll clear the field, as Hank seemed to suggest?
The field is cleared right today. I mean, there's no one going to stand up against him. And I think, unless there's stumbles in the next 2 years or 3 years, whatever, but no serious candidate is going to stand up against him today. And I've never seen this phenomenon. I mean, I worked for Reagan, I worked for other presidents. Maybe they could have done it, but they didn't do it. But he now owns the Republican Party. And I think to a certain extent, if he wants to be the nominee, everybody will be afraid of him. No one's going to basically take up that challenge, and no one's going to have the resources to take up that challenge if he chooses to run.
One of the issues that I see, and you guys have covered a lot of ground, so I'm going to try to step in where perhaps you have not addressed, is Republicans have been afraid to break with Donald Trump for fear that he will turn against them. Given the midterm elections that are coming up in 2022 and how they'll play out, we don't know, but they typically benefit the out party to it, the Republicans not controlling the White House. Do you think Trump will be a force against cooperation with Biden, putting pressure on McConnell and the Republicans to stand firm and oppose the Democratic agenda and oppose cooperation? Ed first, then Hank.
I think he could easily do that. There's no question he drove this agenda. We picked up House seats, we picked up the Senate, or ran even with the Senate because of his efforts. So my sense, if people weren't scared of him 4 months ago, they're definitely scared of him today. So I think the reality here is I don't know whether he cares as much about the philosophical stuff, the substantive stuff, but he certainly wants to be a player and will be a player. I think he'll pick issues. I mean, I think if there's some effort to be more dealing with China, he'll come out and smash that pretty big time. I think redoing the Iran deal will also be an issue that he'll bang away on. The trade issues will be something and obviously the wall will get diminished in the minds of the American public and the taxpayers. And I think he'll come back and hammer away on that. So I think there's 3 or 4 issues that he'll basically be out there pontificating on. But it's going to be interesting to see. But he's a force.
Hank, what do you see Donald Trump's influence on the Republican Party to be in 22 and 24? Do you agree with Ed's assessment?
Donald Trump is not going to leave easily. I said something in Politico, and Ed kind of, and I agree on it, that I said a week ago, he would have been reelected had the virus not occurred in the way that it did, unquestionably in my mind, because he is able in the popular style in a country that has become re-balkanized, where you could even argue that the Confederacy in many ways has been reestablished with border states and all, and we're having those wars in those places all over again. We've never really unified as a nation. He will be the guy attacking those that make the possibility for insurrection within the nation. Who are they? They're the people who are on the outside who feel economically disadvantaged, who feel regionally disadvantaged, who feel religiously disadvantaged. They are the former Reaganites who waited a long time and frankly are sick of it. And the only way they get any relief is Donald Trump. China, trade, foreign immigration, industrialization, anything that looks like it's benefiting his own social class that he attacks is fodder for the Republican mill. And that's what will go on, I think.
If I can ask Chris McAllister, if you're on the Zoom link, do we have questions, as I think I have seen pop up on my screen? Do we have questions we can go through that we can ask our panelists to discuss?
Yes, we do. Absolutely, sir. I'm so glad you brought that up. So we have 5 or 6 questions that have come in so far. First, 2 questions on the same topic. People are curious about what's going to happen with the Georgia Senate runoff and if you have any predictions.
First, Ed, and then Hank.
I assume that we will hold both of those seats in probably a narrow election. Purdue should have won the first go round. It's awful hard to have as much intensity in an off-year election, which is January 5th, than a presidential election. But I think this is going to be a multi-million-dollar race. Everybody in the world is found that so important. Not quite as intense because we now have the 50 seats. But if we got the 51, 52, and I think they probably go hand in hand. If we get one, we're going to probably get 2 of them. Then that does give McConnell the ability to lose 1 or 2 of his not as strident members. And I think to a certain extent, I would bet today that we'll win it.
Hank, do you agree with Ed?
I do, and I'll tell you why. This is not, this is kind of, they're special, these are special elections at the middle of, and the ending of the holiday season, early January. Who's coming out? You know, the other thing that's happening here is that Warnock, one of the candidates in that special run against the appointed incumbent, yes?
Yep.
What did he say that was extraordinary? The reason why the anti-Israel rhetoric of his has been brought up, whether it is true or not is not the question, but that it's been brought up, is not to exercise Jews. There aren't enough of them in the Atlanta market to win anything, but it is to make sure that evangelical Christians turn out in significant numbers in Ralph Reed country. And you can guarantee that about $150 to $200 million is going to be spent in real dollars, some of which we'll never see in dirty money or hidden money, between now and that date, ginning up that population in a very, very, very well organized style. So I would say that Warnock goes first. The other one, Asaf, I just don't see that happening. I mean, they spent what, $16 million to try to elect him to Congress without great success. I just don't see either of them. I think the Democrats will not prevail. The Republicans will hold that margin. Mitch McConnell will feel very good about it, and Joe Biden and he will then sit down and do business.
Chris, do we have some other questions? Yeah, absolutely. We'll keep going. On a related topic, were the Senate races, why were the Senate races such a disappointment for Democrats, do you think? Was it a polling error, or do you think there were specific strategic errors that perhaps Democrats made in those particular races, like the ones in Georgia?
Yeah, I'll start and then very quickly and then turn it to Hank and Dad. I think we had a phenomenon in this election. I was saying to Ed before we started that I think there was a lot of straight ticket voting by Republicans who moved in the direction of Donald Trump and voted down ballot from US Senate down to local office for Republicans. I've heard anecdotal evidence suggesting there was a great deal of that occurred. And my impression is that is in fact the case. And I think that would explain why Tillis won as he did, why Susan Collins won as she did. And I think that more than polling error explains it, because every poll had those races very close, and no poll had Susan Collins getting over 50%. But Ed, do you disagree or do you agree? How do you see it?
I do think there was a traditional campaign on the part of Trump in the end. He was out there campaigning every day, creating energy, good and bad, but creating energy. And I think those Republicans that won those close races and the Senate was driven by him. And I think that Biden was kind of trapped in his basement and doing probably the right thing, but it still didn't create the energy. And I think he faltered a little bit in the end. So I think the close was caused by Trump, and I think he deserves the credit for it. He created the energy.
I think Trump did create the energy. I also think, gentlemen, we have to admit, as people who are certainly in the second generation, solidly of political consultants, following in the footsteps of Matt Reese and Joe Napolitan and Stuart Stevens and all kinds of other extraordinary, the original Stu Roberts, the Stu Stevens, the real ones from California, that we follow in that trend. And we have to be, if we are honest with ourselves, entirely forgiving, if we want to be, of the kind of work that's being done by people who call themselves political consultants. The polling overall was lousy. I mean, if you look at just this Max Rose race, and the same people who gave us AOC by doing a crappy job for Joe Crowley did similar work here. That kind of the political industrial complex protecting the failures of and failed consultants is going on with. If you looked at the spots around the country, if you traveled, they were generally lousy. The Trump work was very, very good, very good. But a lot of the other stuff was just plain lousy. What we do have is piracy at the high seas. And at some point, the donors are going to wake up and say, what are you all doing with our money? And they're going to go to independent expenditures in even greater sense, I would guess.
Chris McAllister, do we have some additional questions?
You bet. Yeah, we have lots of questions coming in. Dr. Steinkopf, you mentioned Max Rose, and he came up in two questions related to New York City elections. One member asked, does Max Rose have a chance to win the absentee vote? If he does or doesn't, do you think he would be a viable mayoral candidate? And would you speak about the New York mayoral campaigns in general?
Okay, well, look, let's take Max Rose as an important figure, not just in New York, but nationally as an exemplar of a problem, which is the electorate has become very smart. And in districts that are not cut properly for incumbents, what happens is if you have particularly two distinctive groupings you think you're going to make a whole lot of, you don't fit in both places. Here you have a guy who has an Ivy League education, but is a Jew in a largely Italian Catholic place, right? Who served in combat, but winds up getting caught carrying a Black Lives Matter sign at a rally. It doesn't fit, and it alienates enough people within one location on one side of the water, and on the other side in a district like that, that's very, kind of not contiguous, that it makes it impossible to win. So he really suffered from that. The other side had much better spots, and frankly, they were better, obviously, in targeting. And the New York City mayoral, I think there's only three people. There's two people in it, and one takes from the other. I think it's Eric Adams, Scott Stringer, and Maya Wiley, Rip Stringer on the left, because she's on the left. Stringer's tried to position himself on the left with ranked choice voting, which is another idiocy from my perspective, is a way to ensure that Black people, Latin people, and blue-collar white people won't be able to figure out ballots and have their power taken from them. Who knows who the mayor will be today? But I would bet that it's one of those three right now.
Ed, how would you respond?
Hank is the expert on the city. I live in the city and have for 30 years. I try and pay no attention to it because it's about 8-1 Democrat. So what I think he says is probably accurate. I think the key thing with Rose is Rose tried to be a Republican. He was a Democrat, got elected as a Democrat, a tremendous upset, and then tried to be a Republican on Fox all the time, running on Republican credentials, and didn't fit.
Very smart, Ed.
Chris McAllister, next question, please.
You bet. So I'm going to kind of relate two questions here. One member had asked, what do you think about the new Trump appointments to the Pentagon? Should Americans be worried? And coupling this with another member's question, what do you think Biden will do when it comes to foreign policy in the Mideast in particular, and how that might those agencies?
Ed, why don't you
Sure.
start on foreign policy?
I'm competing with my wife walking in the door and our dogs all basically.
Yeah, I hear. We got it.
I think, being perfectly honest, I think the president should go out gracefully and not. I think there's a legacy. There's a lot of things he should be talking about. There's a lot of things he's still going to do. I think by making the moves, there's something in the back of his head where he's going to do something, whether it's withdraw all the troops from Afghanistan or what have you. And whatever that is, it's going to be fought by the military and create chaos at the close of his administration. And I think that's foolish to do at this point in time. He didn't put anybody in there that basically everyone said, oh my goodness, thank goodness they're there. I would let the team that's there ride out, but I don't think he's done. I think he's going to fire some other people before he's finished. And again, that will diminish his legacy a little bit as he goes out of office.
And quick question, yes or no? Do you think there are going to be widespread pardons by Donald Trump?
Absolutely. But widespread pardons and Presidential Medal of Freedoms to all of his guys like Lou Dobbs and Hannity and what have you before we're done.
Okay. Hank, how do you respond on foreign policy?
I am grateful that I live in the United States of America, where the military has a tradition of not engaging in civilian activities, and we're very fortunate because were that not the case, the military would be uprising about now, considering the appointments of people who are less than most commanders in the field being appointed to senior positions. It's not good news, and we have to just hope that the Russians and our enemies throughout the world, which are significant, choose to take no action that would cause a military response. We sometimes in this country lose our minds and we think we're exempt from the rest of the world trends. As to the Middle East, Joe Biden has a history of being very supportive of aid to Israel. We need to understand also that Israel is not our poor cousin anymore. Israel's economy, corrected for population, is the 18th largest in the world. It has a nuclear fleet. It has a nuclear air force. It is the best army in the region. And if the Democrats have their way and alienate Israel in any way, shape, or form, Israel will do the smart move because it's a strategic locale. It will move closer to China. And that will happen because there's a larger market for high-tech goods. Simple. So Americans are wise to put the Democrats in place to tell them to behave.
Chris McAllister, we have some additional questions.
We do, yeah, they keep coming in. So another member asked, what about a lot of the current investigations that are ongoing? How do you think they'll play out, from people like Flynn to current investigations into the president and after he is out of office? How do you think these big sphere of investigations will play out?
Ed?
No one cares about Flynn, and no one cares about Hillary's emails. We moved on from all that. And I think to a certain extent, the more you push those issues, the more you have a chance of creating morale problems in institutions like the FBI and the CIA and what have you. It's too late. The game's moved to the next administration.
Hank?
Let the guy leave already. I'm concerned about the Attorney General of the state of New York, and I'm concerned about the Manhattan DA, not the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District. The facts are that he's leaving, and there'll be people who say, "Okay, enough is enough." And frankly, it loses its value if all these investigations continue. Now, what you do with the kids in the foundation, that's a different question. But this guy still, no matter what we say, will be the former president of the United States. It's just not something that we do, and we've demeaned the office sufficiently over the last several years.
Chris McAllister, next question.
One member asked, as a bottom line, why do you think the president did lose?
Ed, you should start with that.
I think that, well, first of all, I think the virus, I don't think he ever showed any empathy on the virus. He did a lot of things that will be positive in the end when they're reflected back on. But I think at the time, he sort of lost interest in the virus. He wanted to get the economy moving again. And the country didn't lose interest in the virus. And older Americans, my generation, we're not ready to be put on the woodpile. We're ready to continue our lifestyle. And I think there was a lack of empathy for us and lack of empathy for those that are suffering. And the suffering's tremendous. So I think he lost some of that base. He lost a little of his religious base. And I think they underestimated the absentee ballot. We've always done well on absentee ballot and early votings. For some reason, they had built this massive machinery for get out the vote on election day, and they totally dismissed the other. And I think 100 million people voted prior to the election day, and that was a very significant force. And that certainly was the difference in the election.
Hank?
As the virus spread from the blue states to the red states and to the exurbia and suburbia, where Donald Trump thought he would do better, and frankly, he didn't. And that had a lot to do with it. And the early voting. More than ever before, the and I would add the publicized moving of mailboxes and shuttering them, the threats about not counting votes. The American system and the American psyche relies on two things that are not insignificant: the voting booth and the Constitution. You move the Constitution out of the building, people lose their minds. You tell people they can't vote, they will lose their minds. Throw in Corona, and you have what occurred, which is Donald Trump lost his reelection.
Chris McAllister, we have time for a few more questions.
Yes, I think so. So on the topic of the current $3 trillion revenue shortfall, do you expect that the Republicans will rediscover their fiscal conservatism under a Biden administration? And do you think that they can maintain that principled position in that regard, given that so much of that deficit spending happened during the Trump administration?
Ed?
I don't think, I mean, I've always been a fiscal conservative. I worked for Jack Kemp, who was not a fiscal conservative at one point. At the end of the day, you have to pay your bills. And I think as people look at the problems facing the country that are very significant, the shortfalls, and you start laying off firemen, policemen, teachers, and it's not just New York, it's all over the country, then there's going to be an effort to supplement it more. We're still hurting economically. It's going to take a period of time before we get our stimulus and get our economy back again. And I think to a certain extent, there will be, it's not going to be as much as Democrats would like or as President Biden would like, but I think they will give some. And once you get Nancy Pelosi out of the main role, then I think to a certain extent that'll be easier.
Hank, will the Republicans be born again fiscal conservatives?
Well, they will be, because Biden will move to protect public sector labor, and the Republicans then will have an opportunity to do what parties on the opposite side always do: find the other enemy. In order for them to function, they need to find an enemy that's really good, and there's nobody better than public sector labor unions, which they will blame for rising costs of government, and that COVID only exacerbated the question. And you'll see a large battle between those unions and the Republicans, and that's not so bad. Why? It restores some sense of balance and who the enemies really are. Unions will get stronger under Biden. We will see probably, I think Bernie Sanders is the next labor secretary, and you'll see new appointments to the National Labor Relations Board that'll make it easy to organize. And the Republicans are going to do what they've done since they decided to take on the unions. It occurred here, frankly, in New York in 1974, when they moved the business council, I think it was called at the time, to Washington, created the Business Roundtable, went after the unions, and they had a real enemy. And that battle continued until the unions were dead. They're going to come back to life. The Republicans have a new enemy to blame for fiscal problems in the cities and states. Get ready.
Chris McAllister?
Yes, so I'm scrolling through a lot of questions here. One gentleman asked, to the point that no Republican is in a position to challenge Trump in 2024 if he seeks the nomination, what do you think the current role of groups like the Lincoln Project, if any, will be moving forward?
Ed,
I think
the
Lincoln
Project, does it have a future?
It was a real talented. It was interesting. It was pretty much an internet phenomenon. Did it take Trump down? No. Did it agitate Trump? Yes. Did it make a lot of us smile at the ads? They did great ads. But are they a force? They certainly weren't a force when they tried to move away from attacking Trump to trying to elect members or defeating members. So I would assume that the people that run that and supply resources for it was more of an anti-Trump movement. I don't think it has long-term effectiveness.
Hank?
Nice ads, win awards, goodbye. And the Republicans will never forgive the guys involved with it. Never.
Right.
Chris McAllister, one or two more questions I think we have time for.
Sure, yeah, I think we do have time for one more question. What do you think the ongoing role or idea of fake news will be? Will the idea of fake news continue to play out?
Ed?
Trump tagged fake news and drove that message for his whole 4 years, to where half the country now does believe that news is fake. And I read a lot of newspapers. I'm an old-fashioned guy. I don't spend all day on the internet. Spend some time, and the news is still good. It's still, but the combination of social media, believing the worst, and creating a distrust, I think, has done great damage to the institution of the country. A free press is very, very important. Calling it a fake press is also diminishing it being a free press.
Hank, will we still have fake news in the Biden administration?
We will have likely Trump calling the news media fake. And again, in order for Trump to remain in power and to continue that populist argument that he used, he must keep the enemies in place. That is the normative style of the paranoid style of politics that we've had in this country since almost the beginning. You know, he's got to do that, and he will keep that going. Why? Because it makes sense for him, and it's a way for him to create a target to blame for the ills of the people he's talking to in the new American political system he's created.
Chris McAllister, do we have time for one more, or where do we stand?
If it's okay with you guys, I do have one more question, then we can wrap it up.
Great.
One member asked, we did touch on a little bit with investigations, but another question came through more specifically with the president and post-election. Do you think there will be any more private litigation that will affect Donald Trump after he leaves office?
Ed Rollins?
I assume the Attorney General of New York, and I don't think the Southern District necessarily, but I think the Attorney General of New York will go after the Trump family and look into a lot of different things and tie him up in litigation for a period of time. You know, he's a guy who's not afraid of litigation. He's been through it all his life, but it is a distraction if you basically spend the next 2 years in court or being under sworn depositions. So I think to a certain extent, I wish there was some way of just saying, you know, let it go away, let him go off in the wilderness and lead a good life. But that's not going to happen. He's going to be an active politician, and being an active politician, you draw fire.
Well, the bad news for New York and for the prosecutors and for the Attorney General is, yeah, they'll go after the foundation, they'll go after the kids, and the rest of it. And what that will do is only enervate and make the Trumpites throughout the nation become more frankly dug in on their basic presumption is that the elitists on both coasts are screwing them, and that's why they need Donald Trump to be back in power. So it's not a good idea. If you want to kill the guy, don't give him any attention. If you want to keep him alive, keep feeding the beast. He thrives on attention, and right now he's like, this is not a defeat for him. This is like an animal having a limb ripped off. I mean, this guy without attention dies. Leave him alone if you want to kill him, but they're going to try to get as much free press for themselves, and the result will be a stronger Donald Trump.
Let me conclude by thanking Ed Rollins and Hank Scheinkoff for an absolutely stimulating and, I dare say, comprehensive and insightful panel. I thank the Harmony members for their questions, Chris McAllister for moderating the question segment, and I can only say, as we like to say, as Jews, next year in Jerusalem, but hopefully next year in the clubhouse, talking about the mayoral election with Ed and with Hank and with all of you. And on behalf of the panel, I thank everyone for your participation.
Thank you.
If I might add, on behalf of all of the members, we're so appreciative of your insight, expertise, and your analysis of everything that we've talked about tonight. Thank you for participating. I also want to remind all of our members who are logged in that the Harmony Club is open for business with graciously appointed member spaces reimagined throughout the clubhouse. And as President Brad Harris actually wrote earlier today, it will be an oasis from the long winter we are expecting. So I hope to see many of you who logged in tonight at the clubhouse soon, socially distanced, of course. I hope everyone stays well and stays safe.
And Chris, I would not be doing my job to conclude by saying, for those of you, and I think that's probably everyone, who's going to have a Thanksgiving dinner, the club is offering favorably priced Thanksgiving dinners to be picked up on Wednesday afternoon. And I believe that I would not be doing my job as moderator if I would not tell you to do what I am doing myself, which is having my meal with my 94-year-old mother, courtesy of James and the Harmony Club. So thank you all.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Thanks again, everybody. Wonderful evening.
Good health. Good health.
Thank
everyone.
you all.
Good health. Be safe, everyone, please.
Yes, be safe. Absolutely. Good night.
Thank you.